July 6, 1941. The vast steppes of Belarusia near the Dnieper River. The air inside the turret of the Panzer III is a stagnant cocktail of gasoline fumes, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of fear that no soldier ever truly scrubs off. But today there is no fear, only the supreme confidence of the conqueror. Oberlieutenant Hans Weber stands in the commander's cupola, goggles pulled down against the choking dust kicked up by the tracks of the 18th Panzer Division. Through the haze of the Russian summer, the horizon vibrates with heat. For weeks, the Wehrmacht has sliced through the Soviet Union like a scalpel through rotted silk. The Red Army is collapsing. Their tanks, obsolete T-26s and BT-7s litter the roadside, burning husks that offered less resistance than the French Char B-1s a year prior. Target at 11 o'clock, range 600 meters. The shout crackles through the throat microphone of Weber's gunner, Unteroffizier Braun. Weber drops into the turret, pressing his eye to the periscope. Through the optics, he sees it. A lone Soviet tank emerging from the birch line, grinding through a field of sunflowers. It looks different from the others. It lacks the rivets and the vertical, boxy architecture of German engineering. It looks squat, ugly, and unfinished. The welding seams are rough, almost barbaric. To Weber, accustomed to the precision machining of Krupp and Rheinmetall, this machine looks like a tractor hastily armored by a blacksmith. "It's a new one," Weber mutters, dismissing the threat. "Load armor-piercing, center mass." Inside the Panzer III, the loader slams a 50mm shell into the breech of the KWK-38 L-42. The breech block slides shut with a reassuring clack. The German crew is a well-oiled machine, veterans of Poland and France. They know their gun can punch through 40mm of steel at this range. This Russian tractor won't stand a chance. "Fire," Weber commands. The tank lurches as the main gun roars. The recoil piston hisses. Weber watches the tracer arc through the humid air, a streak of light destined for the center of the Soviet tank's hull. Clang. The sound reaches them a split second after the visual. It isn't the dull thud of penetration, nor the catastrophic bloom of ammunition cook-off. It is the high-pitched ring of a hammer striking an anvil. Weber blinks, disbelief fighting with adrenaline. Through the smoke, he sees the sparks die away. The shell has vanished. "Ricochet," Braun reported, his voice tinged with confusion. "Direct hit, Herr Oberlieutenant. It bounced." Weber stares at the enemy tank. The shell didn't just fail to penetrate, it skidded harmlessly off the front plate. And then he sees why. The armor isn't vertical, it is angled back at a sharp 60 degrees. The physics of the impact fought not just the thickness of the steel, but the geometry. The German round had been forced to travel through twice the effective thickness of the metal, and the slope had simply shrugged it off into the sky. The crude Russian tank stopped. Its turret, a cast, rounded shape resembling a hexagonal nut, began to traverse. It moves quickly, far faster than the hand-cranked turrets of the older Soviet models. The long barrel of its main gun swings toward Weber's Panzer III. It is a 72.6mm cannon, a weapon that dwarfs the German 50mm. "Driver, reverse, hard left!" Weber screamed, the arrogance of the last month evaporating in a single heartbeat. The Panzer III's engine whines in protest as the tracks churn the earth, trying to find grip. But they are too slow. The T-34's muzzle flashes. A thunderclap rolls over the steppe. The impact against the Panzer III is not a bounce. It is a sledgehammer blow that shears through the front armor plate as if it were cardboard. The tank shudders violently. The smell of ozone and burning insulation floods the compartment instantly. "Bail out! Bail out!"
Weber scrambles up through the cupola, throwing himself onto the engine deck just as a second T-34 emerges from the tree line. Then a third. They move with a terrifying fluidity, their wide tracks floating over the soft mud that usually bogs down the narrower German treads. Lying in the tall grass, heart hammering against his ribs, Weber watches his platoon engage. It is a slaughter. The German shells, standard 37mm and 50mm anti-tank rounds, are sparking harmlessly off the sloped glacis plates of the Soviet monsters. The German crews are firing frantically, closing the distance to suicidal ranges of under 100 meters, trying to find a weak spot. They were essentially knocking on the door, and no one was answering. The soldiers of the Wehrmacht had a name for their 37mm anti-tank guns, the Heeresanklopfgerät, the army door-knocking device. They had said it as a joke, watching a T-34 crush a PaK-36 gun under its treads while ignoring point-blank fire. Weber realized the joke was over. This was not a primitive tractor. This was an apex predator, and the hunters had just become the prey.
October 6, 1941. The Msensk sector, south of Moscow. The rain does not fall in Russia. It conspires. It turns the earth into Razputitsa, a thick, bottomless slurry that sucks the boots off soldiers and swallows truck axles whole. Colonel General Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, steps out of his command car, his boots sinking immediately into the black mire. He is a man accustomed to speed, to the lightning-fast encircle of enemies. But here, the Blitzkrieg has ground to a halt, not just because of the mud, but because of what sits silent and menacing in the clearing ahead. The men of the 4th Panzer Division stand around it in a grim semicircle. It is a captured T-34, dragged from the battlefield after a skirmish that has left the German command shaken. Just days ago, Colonel Katukov's 4th Tank Brigade had ambushed Guderian's advance guard. The German losses were catastrophic. Guderian approaches the steel beast. Up close, the machine exudes a brutish utility. He runs a gloved hand over the glacis plate. It is cold, wet, and incredibly rough. The steel is not polished. The welding beads are jagged scars, evidence of a factory worker in Kharkov or Stalingrad working quickly, caring only about volume, not aesthetics. "Look at the gaps," a young engineering officer mutters, pointing to the turret ring. "You can fit a finger in there. Water leaks in when it rains. It's crude. It's garbage." "It is winning," Guderian snaps, cutting the officer down. "Open it." The heavy hatch clangs open. Guderian climbs onto the engine deck. The smell of diesel is overpowering, a sharp contrast to the volatile gasoline used in German panzers. This is the heart of the beast, the V234 diesel engine. While German tanks risk turning into fireballs when hit, the diesel fuel of the T-34 is less prone to explosion. But more importantly, the engine is made of aluminum. It is light, powerful, and gives the tank a range the Germans can only dream of. Guderian looks down at the tracks. They are massive, 500 millimeters wide. They look like snowshoes compared to the narrow, elegant tracks of the Panzer III and IV. That is why they move while we sink. Dispersion of weight. Guderian drops into the commander's seat. It is cramped. The ergonomics are atrocious. There is no turret basket, meaning the loader has to scramble over ammunition crates on the floor when the turret spins, risking injury. The optics are cloudy and inferior to the Zeiss lenses his men use. The transmission is difficult to shift. He has heard stories of Soviet drivers keeping a sledgehammer next to the gear lever just to force it into place.
But none of that matters. "General," a tank commander from the 4th Division speaks up, his face smeared with grease and exhaustion. "We hit them at 20 meters. 20. Our shells just cracked, like walnuts. The only thing that stopped them was the 88s. He is referring to the 88mm flak guns, anti-aircraft artillery forced into service as anti-tank weapons. They are the only German guns capable of reliably killing this thing from a distance. The standard tank guns are useless." Guderian climbs out, wiping the rain from his face. The arrogance of the summer is dead. The Wehrmacht had assumed the Slavs were incapable of technological sophistication. They believed the Soviet Union was a rotting house waiting to be kicked in. Instead, they had found a nation that had skipped the refinement of Western engineering and gone straight to the brutal physics of survival. The T-34 wasn't built to be comfortable. It wasn't built to last 10 years. It was built to last 3 weeks, the average lifespan of a tank in combat. And in those 3 weeks, to be nearly indestructible to standard fire. Guderian turns to his aide. "Get a message to the High Command, to the Armaments Ministry. I want a commission here, immediately." "What shall we tell them, Herr General?" "Tell them that the Panzer IV is obsolete. Tell them that unless we copy this design, the sloped armor, the wide tracks, the long gun, we will lose this war." The Specialized Tank Commission would arrive in November. Eminent engineers from Porsche, Henschel, and Daimler-Benz would crawl over the captured T-34s with measuring tapes and calibers, their faces pale. They would argue that it was impossible to copy the aluminum engine because Germany lacked the raw materials. They would argue that the sloped armor required complex machining. But the seed of panic had been planted. The German answer would not be a copy, but an over-engineered response, the Panther and the Tiger. But as the winter snows began to fall, burying the frozen corpses of the Blitzkrieg, Guderian knew that the factories in the Urals were churning these green monsters out by the thousands, and the Wehrmacht was still knocking on the door.
July 4th, 1943. The Belgorod sector, southern flank of the Kursk salient. The dawn does not break, it smolders. A thick gray mist clings to the wheat fields of the Ukraine, hiding the greatest concentration of armor the world has ever seen. Hauptmann Friedrich Müller sits in the commander's cupola of his new command. It is not a Panzer III, nor the workhorse Panzer IV. It is a Panzerkampfwagen 6, the Tiger. Beneath his boots, the 700-horsepower Maybach HL-230 engine idles with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrates through the entire 57-ton chassis. This is the Wehrmacht's answer to the T-34 shock. It is a machine born of panic and pride. Unlike the Russian tanks, which look cast from a single piece of ugly iron, the Tiger is a monument to precision engineering. Its armor is not sloped. The German engineers, stubborn to the end, preferred the maximization of internal space, but it is incredibly thick. 100 millimeters of face-hardened steel protects the front. "Radio check," Herr Hauptmann whispers. The acoustics inside are different. It is spacious, almost cavernous compared to the older tanks. "Clear, Herr Hauptmann," the radio operator replies. Müller looks to his left. Through the mist he sees the silhouette of a Panther. It is the new medium tank, rushed to the front specifically for this operation, Citadel. The Panther is the true child of the T-34 scare. It has copied the Soviets' wide tracks and the revolutionary sloped armor. It is sleek, dangerous, and, as Müller knows, temperamental. Half of them broke down just getting to the assembly area, their final drives shattering under the strain of their own weight.
But today, mechanical reliability is a secondary concern. The mission is simple: pinch off the Kursk bulge and destroy the Soviet armored reserve. "Engineers, clear the lane," the order comes down from the net. The waiting is over. The Tiger lurches forward. It does not jerk. The steering is controlled by a wheel, not levers, a luxury of hydraulic assist. As they crest the ridge, the sun burns through the mist, revealing the battlefield. Kilometers away, the Soviet lines are a labyrinth of trenches, anti-tank ditches, and minefields, and waiting in those lines are the T-34s. "Target front, T-34s, range 2,000 meters, the gunner announces. 2 kilometers. In 1941, engaging a T-34 at this range was a waste of ammunition. Today, it is an execution. "Halt," Herr Hauptmann commands. The massive tank rocks gently to a stop. The suspension, a complex interwoven system of road wheels, absorbs the weight effortlessly. "Armor piercing, fire."
The 88mm KWK 36 gun fires. The noise is not a crack, but a physical slam of air pressure that flattens the wheat around the muzzle brake. 2 seconds later, a T-34 on the distant ridge simply disintegrates. The turret is torn from the hull, spinning into the air like a discarded toy. The 88mm shell, originally designed to shoot down bombers at 30,000 feet, ignores the T-34's famous sloped armor at this range. The physics have shifted again. The Germans have stopped knocking. They are now kicking the house down. Target destroyed, traversing right. The mood in the Tiger is electric. They feel invincible. They watch as the Panthers on their flank accelerate, their long 75mm guns picking off Soviet armor with terrifying accuracy. The crude Soviet tanks are scrambling, their formations breaking as they try to close the distance to use their 76mm guns, which are now woefully underpowered against the frontal armor of the German Cats. But as the morning wears on, the reality of the Eastern Front begins to assert itself. Mueller watches through his periscope as a T-34, burning and missing a track, continues to fire. Another T-34 rams a Panther, the crew sacrificing themselves to jam the German tank's turret. The Soviet response is not technological superiority, it is sheer, overwhelming ferocity. "They just keep coming," the loader grunts, sweat dripping from his nose as he shoves another massive shell into the breach. For every T-34 the Tigers destroy, 2 more seem to materialize from the ravines. The horizon is thick with the brown shapes of the Soviet tanks. They are swarming. They are using their speed, closing the gap, getting to the sides of the Tigers where the armor is thinner. "Driver, hard right, flank speed," Mueller yells. A shell strikes the Tiger's side armor. Clang! It holds, but the impact rings their heads like a church bell. They're getting closer. Mueller realizes the grim calculus of the Eastern Front. The Germans have built a masterpiece of engineering, a tank that takes thousands of man-hours to build, requiring rare alloys and expert mechanics. The Soviets are fighting with a machine that can be built by unskilled labor in an unheated factory, roofless to the snow. The Tiger is a duelist. The T-34 is a brawler. And at Kursk, the brawl is just beginning. The radio crackles with a panicked voice from a neighboring Panther platoon. "They are in the wire! They are ramming us! We are taking hits from the rear!" Mueller looks out. The mist has cleared completely, and the field is a graveyard of burning steel. But through the smoke, the green tide of T-34s is still advancing, engines roaring, tracks churning, closing the distance to point-blank range where their primitive guns can finally kill the German giants. The technological gap has been closed by blood. August 12, 1944. The Sandomierz bridgehead west of the Vistula River, Poland. The heat inside the monster is suffocating. Oberfeldwebel Karl Henschel wipes sweat from his eyes, his hand leaving a streak of oil across his forehead. He is commanding a Königstiger, a king tiger. If the original Tiger was a heavyweight boxer, this machine is a mythical beast. It weighs nearly 70 tons. Its frontal armor is 150 millimeters thick and sloped, a belated admission that the Russians were right about geometry all along. It carries the terrified hope of the Third Reich on its massive chassis. "Hold formation!" Henschel barks into the intercom. "Watch the tree line!" They are part of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, sent to crush the Soviet bridgehead on the Vistula. Henschel feels a sense of grim security. Nothing the Russians have can penetrate his frontal armor. Not the standard T-34s, not their anti-tank guns. He is in a mobile fortress. But as the colossal tank groans forward, crushing a farmhouse wall like it was made of matchsticks, Henschel notices something disturbing. The engine, the same engine used in the much lighter Panther, is straining. The temperature gauge is redlining. They are losing tanks not to enemy fire, but to broken final drives and overheated transmissions before they even reach the battlefield. The German obsession with size has birthed a giant with a weak heart. "Contact! Armor right! Distance 400! Henschel spins the periscope. Emerging from the rye fields isn't the disorganized mob of 1941, nor the desperate chargers of Kursk. It is a wolf pack. These are T-34s, but they have changed. The small hexagonal nut turrets are gone. In their place are larger three-man turrets housing a long, menacing 85mm gun. This is the T-34-85. The Soviets have finally fixed the tank's fatal flaw, the overworked commander who had to aim the gun himself. Now, with a dedicated gunner, the commander is free to do what Henschel does: hunt. "Target the leader! Fire!" The King Tiger rocks. The 88mm shell vaporizes the lead T-34, but the others do not panic. They do not stop. They accelerate, their tracks kicking up great rooster tails of dust. They split, flanking the German heavies with practiced coordination. "They're too fast!" the driver shouts, fighting the steering wheel as the sluggish King Tiger tries to traverse its hull to face the threat. The turret rotation of the King Tiger is agonizingly slow when the engine is struggling. Henschel watches helpless as a T-34-85 drifts around his flank, firing on the move, a feat previously thought impossible for Russian crews. Whang! The impact shakes the fillings in Henschel's teeth. The shell strikes the side of the turret. In 1941, German steel would have held, but it is 1944. Germany has lost access to the rare metals needed to harden steel. The armor is brittle. "Spalling!" the loader screams, clutching his face. The shell didn't penetrate, but the shock wave shattered the interior armor, sending razor-sharp flakes of steel flying around the cabin like shrapnel. The invulnerable King Tiger has been hurt by the crude, mass-produced machine. Henschel looks through the vision block. The battlefield is swarming with them. For every King Tiger that crawled off the production line in Kassel, the factories in the Urals have produced 20 T-34s. The Soviets aren't just winning the battle, they're winning the industrial war. They realized that a good enough tank that works is infinitely better than a perfect tank that is outnumbered 10-1. "Reverse! Get us back to the ridge!" Henschel orders. But the transmission screams and dies. The gears shear under the weight of the panic. The 70-ton beast shudders and falls silent, a static pillbox in a sea of green armor. As the T-34s close in, Henschel realizes the cruel irony. The Germans had laughed at the T-34's loose tolerances and simple finish.
But those loose tolerances meant the T-34 kept running in the dust and mud while the Swiss watch precision of the Tiger choked on it. The primitive tank is now the master of the battlefield, and the door to Berlin is wide open.
April 28, 1945. The Moltke Bridge, center of Berlin. The sky is a bruised purple, choked by the smoke of a dying empire. Berlin, the jewel of the Reich, has been reduced to a jagged landscape of concrete skeletons and pulverized brick. Major Hans Weber sits slumped against a pile of rubble near the Spree River. 4 years ago, on the steppes of Belarusia, he had commanded a Panzer III, confident in the superiority of German steel. Now he commands nothing but a terrified group of Volkssturm, old men and teenage boys clutching disposable Panzerfaust launchers. The ground begins to tremble. It is a vibration Weber feels in his bones, a rhythm he has learned to dread over 4 years of retreat. Squeak, clank, roar. Emerging from the smoke down Alt-Moabit comes the victor. It is a T-34-85. But it looks different than the ones in the steppes. It is covered in debris, dust, and slogans painted in white Cyrillic, Za Stalina, to Berlin. Most strikingly, the turret is wrapped in rusted wire mesh, old bed frames looted from German homes, welded hastily onto the tank's sides. "What is that?" a young boy next to Weber whispers, gripping his Panzerfaust with white knuckles. "Armor?" "Protection against your heat warhead," Weber murmurs. "The Germans call it Drahtgeflecht. The Russians just use whatever they can find. It looks ridiculous. It looks like a junk pile on tracks." But as the T-34 pushes over a crushed streetcar, Weber sees the terrifying genius of it. The wire mesh detonates the shaped charge of the Panzerfaust inches away from the hull, dissipating the jet of molten copper before it can burn through the armor. Even at the bitter end, the Soviet machine adapts with crude, effective brilliance, while German factories, bombarded and resource-starved, can no longer produce the complex spare parts for their Tigers. A King Tiger sits abandoned 50 meters away, a lifeless steel carcass. It has no fuel. Its optics are smashed. It is a masterpiece of engineering that is utterly useless. The T-34 pauses. Its turret rotates with that familiar electric whine. The 85mm gun levels at a fortified apartment block housing SS diehards. Boom! The masonry explodes. The T-34 doesn't wait for the dust to settle. It lurches forward, engine belching black smoke. Behind it comes another, and another, a river of green steel flowing through the gray veins of the city. Weber watches them pass. He sees the welding seams, still rough. He sees the cast turrets, still textured like orange peel. He sees the lack of finish, the utter absence of comfort. But he also sees something else. He sees reliability. He sees a machine that drove 2,000 kilometers from the factories beyond the Urals, through mud, snow, and fire, to park on the lawn of the Reichstag. He looks at his Panzerfaust, and then at the endless column of Soviet armor. He sets the weapon down on the cobblestones. "It's over," he says, his voice lost in the roar of diesel engines. The German tankers had laughed in 1941. They had called it a tractor. They had mocked its lack of radios, its cramping, its primitive finish. They had spent the war chasing the phantom of the wonder weapon, building heavier, more complex, more expensive tanks to counter it.
But the T-34 had done the one thing a weapon of war is actually supposed to do. It didn't need to be perfect. It didn't need to be beautiful. It just needed to be there. As the Soviet flag rises over the smoking ruin of the Reichstag, the T-34 engines idle in the streets below, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that sounds, finally, like the heartbeat of a new superpower. The laughter is long gone. Only the silence of the defeated remains.